हेलो फ्रेंड्स, केजी क्लासेस में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको अल्फ्रेड लॉर्ड टेनिसन के लॉन्ग आंसर तथा शॉर्ट आंसर के बारे में बताएंगे। क्वेश्चन फर्स्ट, राइट ए नोट ऑन ए जनरल एस्टीमेट ऑफ टेनिसन एज ए पोएट और टेनिसन्स प्लेस एज ए पोएट। आंसर हेडिंग है इंट्रोडक्शन। एडमंड गॉस थिंक्स दैट टेनिसन इज द लास्ट ऑफ द ग्रेट स्कूल ऑफ द रोमांटिक पोएट्स ऑफ द अर्ली 19th century. He did not start any new school of poetry. He has something of all the elders of the preceding age, and he goes farther along the road to technical perfection than any of them, being one of the subtlest metricists who have ever handled the English language. When his early poems were published, Coleridge remarked that Tennyson had begun to write without knowing what meter was, but he studied and acquired a complete mastery, and no one except Milton has surpassed him in the conscious art of versification. It seems all the romantic poets had a share in the making of Tennyson, except in the matters of technical perfection. They all excel him in their special field. Wordsworth in sublime philosophy, Coleridge in ethereal magic, Byron in passion, Shelley in lyric intensity, and Keats in richness. Tennyson as a thinker in verse does not attain to the lofty height of Wordsworth. He is less enchanting than Coleridge. He cannot rival Byron in his iconoclastic fury, and he does not recapture the emotional zeal of Shelley or the richness and felicity of Keatsian style. Heading as a representative poet, Tennyson is as much as a representative poet of the Victorian age as Chaucer was the 14th century and Pope of the 18th century England. Tennyson's poetry reflects the true spirit of the age. His truly representative characters made him universally popular in his own age. The sanguine spirit of his early writings, with their overflowing faith in science, commerce, and progress, the religious struggles of his middle manhood registered in memoriam, the excitement which fills the pages of Maud, the gloomy foreboding of his epilogue to the idyls of the king and the second luxury hall, even the chastened hopefulness of the down, the dreamer, and the making of man. These are not expression of personal feelings only, they are reflections also of successive moods of the generation into which he had been born. The typical Victorian democratic note, the didactic spirit, Victorian morality about love and sex, and narrow and insular patriotism, in all these aspects, Tennyson is the true representative of his age. All the Victorian feelings find expression in his poems. Heading as a poet of man, Tennyson thought of man in high terms, but he portrayed man as a type rather than an individual. His highest ideal of manhood was King Arthur. He wanted to inculcate the noblest virtue in man and woman. As Stopford A. Brooke remarks, at the root of his poetry lies the ever-working immanence of God in man, the brotherhood of the human race and its evolution into perfect love and righteousness, the continuance of each man's personal consciousness in the life to be, the vitality of the present man alive and nature alive and alive with the life of God. Tennyson drawn his man and woman with close sympathy, as Haddock observes. All his best men are of one pattern, noble, courteous, chivalrous, a little deficient in force and passion, yet bold in adventure and temperate in success. The pattern, in short, of just such an English gentleman as Tennyson himself was. Heading as a poet of nature, Tennyson occupies an important place as a poet of nature, but his attitude towards nature is different from that of Wordsworth. Tennyson loved to paint nature in all its picturesque beauty with a scientist's accuracy and minuteness, whereas Wordsworth found serenity and peace in nature. Tennyson noticed in it a brutal struggle for existence. His approach to nature is intellectual rather than emotional. Wordsworth loved solitary communion with nature, but Tennyson never saw nature without thinking of man. He pupilled his landscape as he was afraid of being alone. Generally, long nature to Tennyson is a background for reflecting some human emotions. In fact, in Tennyson's poetry, nature is humanized. She rejoices or is steeped in gloom accordingly as man in a joyous or in a sorrowful mood. Her beauty, calm and music are of our creation. Heading as a lyric poet. By temperament, Tennyson was a lyric poet. He had been endowed with all those qualities which would have made him the supreme lyric poet of his country. But unfortunately, the poet did not strictly follow the lyric force of his genius and allowed his lyric energy to be obscured by less vital elements. Instead of remaining a singer voicing forth the subjective feeling that welled in his heart, he chose to be a dramatist, a narrative poet, an ethical teacher, and a communal ward. Had he realized that what he felt was infinitely more important than what he thought, he would have been another Shelley or Swinburne in English lyric poetry. Nevertheless, the lyric impulse never died in him. Temperamentally, he possessed all the qualities of a lyric poet. His genius was essentially subjective. His was a lovely soul, melancholy and afraid. The deepest note in his soul is one of frightened agony, as of some wild creature caught in a trap at night. Among his finest lyrical pieces may be included Marina, Oriana, Merman and Mermaid, The Miller's Daughter, The Lotus Eaters, Brick, The Dream of Fair Women, Luxury Hall, The Brook, and The Splendor Falls on Castle Walls, Tears, Idle Tears Came into the Garden, Maud O'Swallow, and finally In Memoriam. Heading as a thinker. Tennyson was a philosopher poet. He was a great thinker of his time. As Campton Ricketts remarks, no poet was more exercised by religious problems than he, and no poet was more sensitive to scientific thought than he. In Tennyson's poetry can be traced dominant ideas of the day. Of course, he was not a philosopher in the true sense of the term. In his poetry, particularly in his In Memoriam, he did not aim at giving us a reasoned metaphysical of God's soul and immortality, but still it reveals the fact that Tennyson thought deeply and earnestly about these metaphysical aspects. He had firm faith in the supremacy of law and order. His poetry is essentially religious in temper, and he has a faith in God and his love and goodness which shines like a clear and quiet flame in his poetry. Having an aged poetic artist, Tennyson was a greater poetic artist than anything else. He was a meticulous artist, revising and revising what he wrote. In his minute observation of nature, his scholarly appreciation of all that is most picturesque in the literature of the past, in the exquisite precision in the use of words and phrases, in the picturesqueness and aptness of his similes, in his avoidance of the commonplace, in his use of repetition and assonance, in his excessive harmonies of the rhythms, and in the subtle melody of his diction. Tennyson has no equal. Tennyson excels in the deft application of sound to sense. His use of alliteration and vowel music is subtle and pervasive. In handling the English metre, he shows excellent craftsmanship, as Albert remarks. In blank verse, he is not so varied and powerful as Shakespeare, nor so majestical as Milton, but in the skill of his workmanship and in his wealth of diction, he falls but little short of these great masters. Heading is summing up. Tennyson became a legend in his age. For over 50 years, he was almost worshipped as a demigod by the Victorians, but with the passage of time, particularly with the dawn of the 20th century, a change in the attitude towards him began to be visible. Like the other Victorian heroes, he was also taken down from his pedestal. It is true that Tennyson reflected the age in full in his poetry. The Victorian compromise in religion, ethics, and politics is faithfully reflected in his works, but there has been a shift in emphasis on aesthetic values in our own day. The modern reader cares more for authenticity of emotion and sincerity of experience than accuracy and finish in art. At intellectual level also, Tennyson has failed to satisfy the imagist, impressionist, expressionist, surrealist, surrealist, etc. As H. Nicholson observes, the truth is that whereas Tennyson was an extremely good emotional poet, he was unfortunately a very inferior intellectual thinker. His lyric gift was powerful, his gift of emotion was immense, his capacity of thought second-rate, his message is a very inconclusive affair, his compromise not very sincere, but his lyric emotion is always beautiful when he allows it expression. The views of Michael Milgate fittingly summarize the stature of Tennyson as a poet. For the modern poet, it is true Tennyson is still not a contemporary, a living force, but Tennyson had never ceased to be widely read, quoted, and admired. His poems have always had a steady sell, and in recent years, critical appreciation of his work has been steadily growing. T.S. Eliot is firm in his judgment. Tennyson is a great poet for reasons that are perfectly clean. He has three qualities which are seldom found together except in the greatest poet: abundance, variety, and complete competence. Tennyson did not produce any monumental work of genius such as Paradise Lost. He had not given the world a new vision of itself as Wordsworth did. He may even have written nothing quite so indispensable in the English poetic tradition as 2 or 3 pieces by Marvell at the abundance, the variety, and the competence. The superlative technical excellence are indisputable, and Tennyson's essential greatness cannot be denied. Short answer type question. First, discuss Tennyson as a democratic. Answer. Victorian age was an age of democratic spirit. Common people were fighting for their equal rights and political freedom. Tennyson himself belonged to the upper middle class and could not transcend the limitation of his class. This attitude towards the common man was that of the cultured aristocratic outsider, but he favored peaceful and slow evolution rather than any kind of struggle or revolution. His attitude was one of compromise between the claims of the masses and those of the landed aristocracy, but he had little support for the demand of equality. In the Lord of Burleigh, he supports the claim of the landed democracy. However, in The Princess, he deals with the question of emancipation of women. According to Tennyson, men for the field and women for the hearth, men for the sword and women for the needle-sea, men with the head and women with the heart. Men to command and women to obey. All else confusion. Question second. Point out social outlook and attitude of Tennyson towards human life. Answer. In his social outlook and general attitude towards human life, Tennyson was a conservative and old-fashioned gentleman who looked with eyes of disfavor at any social progress that the masses might be able to get under the inspiring idealism of a democratic life. He was pretty conscious of the social problem rising out of the transformation of England from an agricultural to an industrial country. The miseries and suffering of the poor worker and laborers were before his eyes, but he was not sympathetically moved by their suffering. Being a national poet, he appropriately showed his concern with them and gave expression to his sympathy in such poems as The Northern Cobbler, The Princess, Children's Hospital, Rijpah. But his sympathy was merely lip sympathy, never emerging from a sincere feeling for their distress. Tennyson's treatment of social evils such as unemployment, low wages, drunkenness, poverty, Queller was unsatisfactory. Tennyson's treatment of the one single burning problem of the new woman and her position in human society in The Princess clearly showed that he was not prepared to grant women the same political and economical right as men had in Victorian society. In his attitude towards public life, Tennyson laid emphasis on law, order and discipline. Cultivation of moral values could alone bring about salvation of human life. Question third. Write a note on Tennyson's political view. Answer. In his political views, Tennyson was a conservative, disdaining revolutionary changes in human society. While admitting the necessity of change, he insisted that change should be gradual and evolutionary in character. He was not at all in favor of a revolution that might upset the settled order of law and usher in the unhealthy role of the mob. The sweeping tide of democracy, bringing the common man to the forefront, was looked upon with following eyes by the poet. He had no faith in democracy, equality, or fraternity. He had none of the revolutionary enthusiasm of Byron, nor could he breathe a feeling of righteous indignation at the deplorable state of the people sunk in the mire of poverty and disease. He upholds the old order based on class division rather than accepted a classless society. The radical democratic passion of Shelley that sought to obliterate class division in the man found no response in Tennyson's breast. He believed in the great man theory, though he never confounded might with right to the same extent as the author of the latter-day pamphlets. He showed the bulldog qualities of the English race and the militant nationalism of a powerful nation in such poems as The Charge of the Light Brigade, Ballad of the Fleet, The Defense of Lucknow, The Revenge in his foreign and imperial politics. Tennyson had the vision of a narrow insular patriot who considered all foreigners as devils and all democratic movement on the continent as devilish. Question 4. What are the religious and philosophical outlook? Answer. Harm has been done by those who have spoken of Tennyson's philosophy, whether to exalt or belittle him. Say Bradley, for he was not a philosopher any more than Wordsworth was a Browning or Meredith, though he shows, I think, more sign than they of the gift that make a philosopher. Tennyson lived at a time when the conflict between religion and science was coming to a head. Materialism was growing apace and shaking the very roots of religious faith and morality. Men should strive to be once again with the Almighty God and thereby attain the goal of union with the soul of the universe. This union of the human soul with the divine soul could be possible if man followed the path of morality, truth, righteousness, and virtue. Tennyson confidently asserted that at the back of the universe there was God who ruled over the entire world. Tennyson went a step further and admitted divine intervention in all the affairs of man. It was a debatable question whether God was in any way interested or interfered in the affairs of man. All the visible things were the sign and shadows of the invisible, the intimations of some eternal power or divinity, but this hope for the ultimate perfectibility of man was by no means the main elements of Tennyson's faith. Next question. Write a short note on the music and melody as Tennyson has presented in his work. Answer. Tennyson lyrics are extremely melodious and musical. The poet has a trained and refined ear for music and metrical harmony, and the metrical flow of his lines is completely free from the defects of rhythm and melody. He knows the art of harmonizing the sense with the sound of the words employed in his lyrics. Dunn rightly points out he is a great poet because he is a great artist, a master of words and meters, a maker of magical music. Tennyson's music varies according to the thought and emotion. In memoriam, subtle variations are seen in pause, cadence, and rhyme. Thus, monotony is avoided with great skill. In Lotus Easter, the music is perfectly in keeping with the atmosphere of languor. There is a sweet music here that's softer falls than petal from blown roses on the grass or night dew on still waters between wall of shadow granite in a gleaming pass. Music that gentler on the spirit lies than tired eyelid upon tired eyes. Celine Court observes that the charm of Tennyson's best lyrics lies in the secret and indefinable beauty of words and tone. The brook come down into the garden, Maud, Break, Break, Break are some of the most musical poems of Tennyson. Next question. What are the limitations of Tennyson as a lyric poet? Answer. Tennyson's lyrics and songs, in spite of all the eulogy that they have borne from critics and admirers of his poetry, cannot be placed in the first rank of lyrics and songs. As Albert says, on the whole, his nature was too self-conscious and perhaps his life too regular and prosperous to provide a background for the true lyrical intensity of emotion. The lyrics of Tennyson, with all their charms, hardly scale the radiance of a lyric by Sappho or Sophocles. They fail to move us and strike a sympathetic chord in our heart. Even some of the lyrics of pathos and mournings fail to move us. The music is a little cloying. The song fail to appeal to our feelings. No one can dispute the feeling of Tennyson's lyric, but it is usually clothed in such subtle graces of fancy, in such artful cadence, in such enameled coloring that it strikes the imagination more than the heart. Even the music failed to attract, for it appears the music of recitation of memory, of thought rather than of song. The songs of Burns, as may my love is like a red, red rose, or the devil came finding through the town, are more attractive and appealing than the songs of Tennyson. In them we feel the lack of feeling and genuine emotion which we come across in Shakespeare's songs such as Full Pathon, Five, Thy Father Lies, or Tell Me, where each fancy bred Tennyson's song and lyrics thus fail to appeal to our heart with the same intensity and emotional force as the lyric of Burns and Shelley appeals us. Next question, discuss Tennyson as a poet of nature or give a comparable estimate of Tennyson and Wordsworth as a poet of nature. Answer, Wordsworth had loved nature for its own sake. He placed her on the basis of equality with humanity as a subject of poetry. Nature brought him solace, comfort, a sedateness of mind, and a spiritual calm. Worshipping devotedly at the shrine of nature, Wordsworth finally looked into the life of things and had mystical vision of the oneness of man and nature. Nature was both law and impulse to Wordsworth, but as he grew, Wordsworth came to emphasize more and more the disciplining element in nature and more placid and tranquil aspect of nature. Nature thus molded his moral being and gave him a spiritual calm, a high reward. Indeed, his lifelong devotion to nature, and none could escape the influence of this mighty mind, but it was not possible owing principally to disturbing discoveries of science for Tennyson to imbibe that calmness of spirit from nature with an unique unquestioning faith. As Stopford A. Brooks remarks, mainly speaking, the difference between Wordsworth and Tennyson as poet of nature consists in the absence from Tennyson's mind of any belief or conception of a life in nature. He described nature on the whole as she was to his own senses. As she appeared on the outside, he did it with extraordinary skill, observation, accuracy, and magnificence. He did not conceive nature as alive. Question, give a short estimate on Tennyson's intellectual treatment of nature. Answer, Tennyson's approach to nature is intellectual rather than emotional like that of Wordsworth. His approach is that of a scientist who is also an artist. He reviewed nature with the eye of a scientist who saw both the aspects pleasing and wild in nature. To him, nature is not alive. He describes it as it appears to his senses with accuracy and skillful art. It has beauty and sublimity. It can inspire awe and admiration but it does not communicate since it is lifeless. Therefore, his attitude is scientific. The scientific attitude can be illustrated by numerous quotations from poems like The Lotus Eaters. They not only reveal his loving and minute observation of nature but also his unique mastery of scientific details. Like Lucretius, he really understood well the depth of science in Tennyson's treatment of external nature. We find therefore a happy blend of the sensuousness of Keats and the scientific spirit. He is sensitive like Keats to the impression of the senses, and at the same time he is conscious of the element of law and order in nature. In The Lotus Eater, he selects details of internal nature to create in the reader a mood which owns its quality and richness, heaviness, and lassitude to the quality of the impression gathered by the sense. Objective type question. Question. When was Alfred Lord Tennyson born? Answer. 1809. Question. When was the small volume of poetry entitled Poems by Two Brothers published? Answer. 1827. Question. Alfred Tennyson was sent to a grammar school at Louth at the answer age of 7. Question. Tennyson's father insisted that he should not go to the university until he could recite all. Answer. Ode of Horace. Question. When did Tennyson join Cambridge University? Answer. 1828. Question. Which prize did Tennyson win? Answer. Chancellor Gold Medal. Question. Tennyson's second volume of poems was published in answer. 1832. Question. When did Tennyson leave university? Answer. 1831. Question. Tennyson said of him, he was as near perfection as mortal man could be. The word him referred to. Answer. Hallam. Question. What is the form of tears? Idle tears. Answer. Lyrics. Question. It bids the past die and the present and the future live. Who said? Answer. A brook. Question. Luxley Hall is an imaginary place and the hero is imaginary. The whole poem represents young life, its good side, its deficiencies, and its erring. Who said? Answer. Tennyson. Thanks. Best of luck.